When you look back and think about your days at school, what do you remember most? My guest tonight helped create a writing project to capture those memories, and they got their whole town involved. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Page One, the award-winning show for writers with the reader in mind.
That draws the reader along, just like fiction.
Here's your host and producer, Zita Christian.
Hi everyone, welcome to Page One. I am delighted to be able to share my guests with you tonight because not only are they friends, but they have created a fascinating writing project. So please welcome Charlie Margolis and Mary Etter. Mary, head librarian, South Windsor Public Library, and Charlie Margolis, our current poet laureate for the town of South Windsor.
That's right. Hi, Zita.
Hi, and welcome back, because you've been on the show before. You know, I'm fascinated by this project, the whole idea of getting a town involved in a writing project and producing a book from it. So, Charlie, let's start off with just some foundation basics. What's the book about?
This is a book of short stories about school. All of us have reminiscences.
Yeah.
All of us have feelings. You know, learning, especially when it's connected with emotion, stays with you. So who doesn't remember that special teacher or that bad experience in PE class or the cafeteria? All of us have something in common, and that's our experience in school. So we sought to capture that, to capture it back the way it was, with the authenticity and that sense of feeling that everyone can relate to. And so we came up with this project, which was a book of short stories, and invited people in South Windsor to write about their experiences, any experience that they had in school at any level.
So what's the title of the book?
It's called Voices 2, which followed our very successful Voices book of poetry, also written by the community. Mm-hmm. And the title is Voices 2, Thoughts of School, Schools of Thought, which our committee came up with.
It has that education piece
by all means
to it, which is so good. Mary, now I know you were a member of the steering committee on this whole project, and you're one of the book's editors and one of the proofreaders. So I figure you are familiar with every writer, every contributor. You would have to be. So can just give me an idea of some of the people or the types of people who contributed to the books.
Sure. Well, there's a very wide range of people in the community, and that's exactly what we had hoped for. Originally, the book of poetry drew on the experience that anyone in town might have had writing in a particular style from the heart. And there are lots of secret poets in the world who are not published, so that came rather easily. But when we wanted to do a book of prose, we wanted to do a book that would somehow be united by a common experience. And that's why we chose school, because we figured everybody's been there and everybody has something to remember about it. But then you sort of advertise and don't know what you're going to get. This time it took a long time, but we received wonderful memoirs from people who are now politicians, engineers, a firefighter, a number of teachers, a social worker, people from all walks of life at different ages. Our youngest contributor is a freshman in college this year. Our oldest contributor was a teacher in the 40s, I think. So, you know, a very wide range, both sides of the desk. And it was exactly what we hoped for.
So you got like a kaleidoscope with all these different components, and what a pretty picture it must have made.
It's lovely.
You know, when you mentioned that it took a little longer for the second book of the prose pieces than it did for the first book of the poetry, do you think, was that because the writers were reluctant to contribute, or was it a matter of something technical like reaching the community? What was that about? Any kind of reluctance at all?
Well, I think a combination of things, but I think someone, again, contrasting, someone who writes poetry has a feel for words and an intention of conveying an emotion in a relatively short form. when you start calling it prose, talking about a memoir, it sounds very intimidating. It sounds like a
Yes.
much bigger project, even though some of these pieces are quite short. But some of them are very detailed. I think people had to think about it a lot more than they did the first time. The first time they were going back in the closet or the drawer for poems that they'd already written. This was specific.
Everyone
that's
has a
nice.
story, but everyone isn't sure their story is worthy of being in a book. And even though everyone has a story, everyone is not a writer. And so we had to prod and encourage and pry and extend our deadline for a long time and do a little hoping and praying on the side to help and encourage people to come in and contribute their stories.
Well, did you have an idea, ahead of time that you needed to fill a certain number of pages or a certain number of stories? I mean, otherwise you could have, kept extending it until maybe, the book was this thick in the end. So what was what created the parameters?
Well, time created the parameters. This began, I think almost 3 years ago this spring, when we were wrapping up the wonderful steering committee of Voices, the poetry book. We were wrapping up, and we went to a local restaurant, and we were going to talk about the little bit of remaining residual money we had from the first publication. What would we do with it? We give it to charity, leave it in our fiduciary fund, or do another project. And I, for one, I was really excited about this because I like this whole, I'm a former teacher, I like this whole school thing.
Yes.
And I know people have stories. So we started with parameters of around a year or so, but we were not getting the kind of response. It was like being an athlete, you have to warm up. So people warmed up after a while. We extended our deadline, we opened it to poetry. I think we have one poem in there, Mary, right?
Yes.
And then the stories came in, and the interesting thing is they were quality stories, well-written, interesting, and engaging.
That's, you touched on a couple things that I want to follow up on. You said at the very beginning, not everybody thinks their story is worth telling. And oh my gosh, that's one of the reasons I do this show, is I just think that's so important that people realize everybody has something inside them that's worth telling, that's worth sharing. But you also commented that not everyone is a writer. And that's true. So you need an editor. You need someone who can look at the raw material and say, oh, that nugget is right there. And here's what you need, either expand a little or trim a little, to really make that piece shine. So Mary, I'm assuming that is where you come in, your work as an editor. Did you find it was more trimming or expanding?
Trimming, much more. And this was also a learning experience for the steering committee. With the poetry book, again, they're writing in a specific form that the writer has chosen as the perfect way to convey their emotions. There's more heft to a piece of prose, and there's more involved with it. So we started out with 2 teachers, retired teachers on the steering committee, reading each of the works just for grammar and punctuation and spelling. We also had a formal editor who is a retired librarian and a published author himself. And he took all of the pieces, considered them, and not only edited them in terms of the actual text and the continuity of the story and the real meaning of the story, but he also divided the book into the 8 sections.
I was going to ask you about that.
Looked
Yes.
at how these stories fit together and what banners might be used to describe the different ones. Then when it came to me, it was really copy editing. So it was, once again, refining the grammar and punctuation. In the end, although we were always prepared to have conversations with authors if there were things structurally that really needed to be changed, we didn't have to have any of those conversations because the changes were so minimal. It was just a matter of making sure that the punctuation and spelling was there and that the pieces made sense. We really didn't change the text significantly for anybody.
All right.
Over our first summer, we gave 2 workshops with our editor. And this is where you see exactly what you're talking about, Zita. The people were so excited about their stories, and they would stand up and they would tell their story, say, how do I write this? And we did it literally right there. And it was a hot summer's night. And I remember the following year when David Garnes, our editor, said, "These stories are really good." I'll never forget that, because that was an aha moment for me. I knew we really were onto something.
Yeah.
And that was
David
exciting.
Garnes has been on the show here too. Yeah, waiting for the train to come in. I had him come in to talk about his book.
It was a huge amount of work, though.
Yeah, I'm
Mary
sure.
must know every story by heart, because I don't know how many times she proofread and went over and over. I said, you saw that? I didn't see that. How's that? And David had all the proof marks and all the editing marks, time and time and time again. My job as the chair of the steering committee was to bring chocolate to the meetings, and that was it.
He does
but
it
these
really
people, these people worked so hard, and it was such an ongoing process of about 3 years.
Well, anytime I have a steering committee for anything, I'm going to have you be on the committee.
can depend on
but
it.
There you go. I want to go back to something, Mary, you mentioned about how then David was the one who helped divide the sections. What are some of the sections?
Well, it was very nice. He decided to take a look at some common phrases that we use to refer to school experiences, and he divided it that way. So he talked about magic moments, an apple for the teacher, art into life, and then a converse one with life into art. One for the teacher reflects. Another apple for the teacher, and it wasn't all reading, writing, and arithmetic. A little bit about the extracurricular activities that form the really firm memories.
Yeah, and so I want to get into one of those memories now. Now, Charlie, I know you have 2 contributions in the book, and I enjoyed both of them immensely.
Thank you.
The one about the magic wand and the one that has the music component. I picked a little segment from the one about the magic wand, and this is page 1, so I usually ask, the guest to read page 1, but the subject matter is a little different here. So in the copy that you have there, would you read that section that I marked?
I would be happy to.
Thank you.
This is called The Magic Wand.
Okay.
The sales clerk waited patiently for me to sign my check. "That's a cool pen," she commented. "Have you ever seen one of these?" I inquired. She had not. "You write nice for a guy." "It's the pen," I replied, ignoring the bias in her comment. I attended the Sarah J. Rawson Elementary School, K-6. Generations of neighborhood children passed through the venerable brownstone facade. In the 1950s, doors were never locked. We walked home for lunch and played pickup baseball games on the dusty field behind the school. Majestic maple trees shaded streets in the summer and turned the landscape into a picture postcard during autumn. Piles of fallen leaves were burned by the curbside, foreshadowing the onset of winter. After sunset, families gathered around black and white televisions or sat on lawn chairs to wait for the Good Humor truck. As far as I was concerned, the north end of the city where I lived was the Garden of Eden. Graduating from pencils to pens was a rite of passage in elementary school. Every classroom displayed the letters of the alphabet above the blackboard. Arrows directed the strokes for proper penmanship. Desks and chairs were one piece. In the upper right-hand corner, there was a glass inkwell. The top of the desk was hinged, providing a place for books, pencils, and wads of chewed gum inside. Handwriting was a fundamental part of the 4th grade curriculum. We moved from the perils of dip pens to disposable ballpoints, which skipped almost as frequently as they wrote. Mastering the skills of cursive writing was a rite of passage. Among other things, it meant that students could purchase their own fountain pen. With interchangeable nibs and the jewel-like plastic barrel, the Estabrook pen was the official school writing instrument. My mother was left-handed, but she was required to write with her right hand. Conventional wisdom held that left-handed people couldn't use fountain pens. Smudged letters and stained fingers were the legacy of lefties. Nonetheless, I was determined to find a way to overcome my disadvantage.
Charlie, thank you. Thank you so much. And that's just that's not the whole story. So, if you're watching, you can get the book and read all of it, plus all of the other stories that are in there. I love that piece. I love so much of the detail. I mean, those beautiful, very specific details, how you paint the picture. And I too remember, because I mean, I spend all my allowance at the stationery store. I go into a Woolworths or any of the dime stores and head straight to the stationery department and look at the paper and the pens, and oh, those fountain pens. Oh my gosh. And I have a friend who's left-handed, and she has a collection of fountain pens. So that comment there about
Me too. And I
you
still,
too?
absolutely. I still have my attachment to fountain pens. I was telling Mary, just before Christmas, I was in a local department store, and the clerk, a very nice young girl, said to me, "You got one of those." I mean, this happens to me all the time. I said, "Do you know what this is?" She said, "Well, no, not exactly." I said, "This is a fountain pen." She said, "That's really cool," just like the girl in the story. I gave it to her because she would never get access to such a thing. I said, "You have to buy your own ink now."
Oh, that's wonderful. What a gift and what a memory you helped make
It
with
was
her.
Christmas, you know.
Well, that's a whole gift-giving season. You know, it occurs to me, with the people involved, the work involved, the effort of getting the information out, the time that's put in, and the actual production, how did you pay for this? How'd that happen?
Beg, borrow, and steal, as they say. With, the wonderful thing about South Windsor is that we've received total unequivocal support for what we're doing. And so at the beginning of a project, what we do, and it's fairly expensive to publish and print a book like this, we go to people like Mary and the Friends of the Library, who were very generous with their grants. South Windsor Community Foundation is our fiduciary, and they also contributed a lot of money. The South Windsor Human Relations Commission, when we ran over, kicked in money. And individuals, particularly in the case of the first book, individual donors were generous to us too. So we've been able to produce and publish 2 books, and we're hoping to do a 3rd as well, thanks to the generosity and the support of our town. Now, to our knowledge, and that's my disclaimer, no other town we've ever heard of anywhere has produced books entirely written and paid for by their communities. And that's what makes, one of the things that makes it quite special.
That's quite an accomplishment, and I have to say, I hope that if that is the actual statistic, that it will not stand for long, because I would love to see other towns follow your example and give an opportunity for their citizens to have a voice where they can express, either through poetry or story or essay or whatever medium they choose, but to get their stories down. The book is illustrated. You have some beautiful pen and ink or pencil drawings in here. So who did the illustrations?
They're done by a member of our committee, who's an aide in one of the elementary schools, named Tracy Anderson. Now, these are, I'm a former art teacher. I'm telling you professionally, these are absolutely spectacular illustrations. Now, Tracy is an enthusiastic, talented artist, and all we had to say is, "Tracy, how about giving us some illustrations?" And she came on an August afternoon with a portfolio filled with them. And we did not even pick and choose. We said, we have to use all of them. And
Nice.
our job was to choose where we would put them when we sent our book to. We also have our book designed by a graphic designer, because the selection of type, the placement, the arrangement, all of that requires a pro who really knows what they're doing. And we spend the money for that, and it's worth every cent of it, because
it
we
really
have
is.
this is a professionally done book. The illustrations are marvelous. I think they add so much to it, so much interest. It's just another way of telling a story.
And I think also the fact that you spent the time, the effort, and the money to have it professionally produced speaks volumes about not only that you personally have a vested interest in the success of the book, but that you value the contributions that were made.
Absolutely,
So,
we do.
Which leads me to sort of a philosophical question. Why do you think a book like this is so important? How about with you, Charlie?
Me first. Well, I think there are 2 things. I originally had the skeleton of the idea that night in the restaurant, because I love school stories. And I knew from day one that this would be an important document because it's history. It's first-hand history of what school was like. My neighbor is a fourth grade teacher who works about 12 hours a day, including weekends. School is totally different from the way it is when we went there.
Yeah.
Better in many ways, not in some other ways. However, this document will stand forever in a sense that it will show people what school was like and what we experienced. And so much so that it was my goal from the beginning to get this to perhaps the Director of Education. We've sent it to the CEA. We've given it to our congressman with hopes that they will sidle up to the president one day and put it in his hand. It's entirely possible.
Well, you know, it's a snapshot of history told in stories.
Well said.
And that's, yeah, I think that's part of the beauty of the medium of it. Mary, what about you? When you think about this book, for you, why is it important?
I think it honors the skill and the art of the contributors as well. And since my part in producing the book had a lot to do with the mechanics of it, I was very concerned that people's work stay as they meant it to be, which is not always easy, as you know,
Yes.
I'm sure.
Yes, yeah,
I'm
voice.
sure, as an
Yeah,
author.
you want to preserve the voice, and
Exactly.
that's hard
Exactly.
sometimes.
It is a record of South Windsor. Now, the stories did not all happen in South Windsor, but the people are South Windsor residents or former residents now. And so it is a picture of our town and the people in it and the very rich background that they bring to their lives here now.
You know, that leads me to one thing I definitely wanted to mention. I noticed that the foreword in the book is written by your former mayor, Dr. M. Saad Anwar, and he writes about an experience in medical school. So this isn't all elementary or middle school or high school, but we have a piece from medical school. So that concept of what we are learning in that educational environment, I don't think there is any age limit on how it can enrich our lives.
Right.
No, that was his is a wonderful story, and you're absolutely right. One of the early issues for us was people said, did I have to go to school in South Windsor to contribute to this book? And we said, no, you don't have to. Wherever you went to school, as long as you live here now and you're a resident, you can talk about that, as I did.
Well, when you have such wonderful response, people know over the course of 3 years, that this is coming. It's this, the birthing process. And now it's out. So what's the response that you've gotten from the authors, and what's the response you've gotten from the public? Mary, let me start with you.
Okay, well, first of all, from the authors, delight. In some cases, literally, people thought something had happened along the way and it was not going to be published. And so it was a delightful surprise when all of a sudden it was there and it's in print, and perhaps they participated in the launch party. Reading. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Now other members of the public are beginning to see it. I mean, the launch party was, at this point, only a week and a half ago, so we haven't had much time for people to see it. But they are, and I think they're really impressed with the quality of the writing that's in here. And as you said, with the breadth of experience. It actually starts at preschool and goes beyond med school. What we consider the endpoint story is adult education outside of the strictures
May
of
it
school.
never end.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And
Exactly.
and Charlie, what about you? You do. I mean, in your professional life, you coach people, pageant contestants, politicians, students who are applying for scholarships or applying for college. So that idea of working with people so that they can present themselves at their best. That's something you do. So there has to be, like, I would think, an added level of satisfaction for you to see people you've coached through this process see their work come in a tangible form.
At the publication party, one of the ladies who was in our workshop, I remembered her, And I told her so. She came up to me right at the very beginning, and she was so excited to have her story told, and she was one of our readers as well. That is so satisfying, as you said. It's such a good feeling.
I want you to tell me more about that publication party. So do you have a lot of people? And you mentioned several people who have stories in the book did read.
Well, if you
So
know,
what else?
the first rule of any workshop or good party is serve good food.
Very true.
And
very
for that,
true.
we have Mary. So tell her what you did.
We have the committee in
Yes.
Mary. We thought about what would be the perfect food to serve for this particular book's launch. And we decided peanut butter and jelly,
Okay.
Oreos, and the ever popular fruit cocktail.
Oh my gosh.
My
gosh.
yeah, with lucky cherries and grapes.
Dole
Dole fruit cocktail.
Oh, I remember.
And
I
yes,
remember.
yes. I think my one regret in planning the party is that we couldn't actually get the little white fluted cups for the fruit cocktail without buying 2,500 of them, which was a little bit beyond what we
yeah.
needed. But but it was a lot of fun. I mean, people had a great time because it
And the
was
food
just
evokes
called back.
an immediate memory too.
Sure.
You know, we only have about a minute left, and I do want to ask, what's next? Is there another one in the works?
Yes, Voices 3, title remaining to be firmed up, is going to take advantage of our 11 walking trails in South Windsor. So, very succinctly, we're inviting people to walk a trail. Walk it regularly, walk a different trail as much as you want, whatever you choose. Walk every day if you choose for a year. Over a year's time, we're asking our trail walkers to contribute anecdotes, short stories, thoughts, feelings, sightings, photos, poems, whatever comes out of the experience, we want them to share. We'll produce it by chapters, i.e. 11 chapters, and each one will tell a story of a trail through the eyes and the feet of different people who have used it. So we're very excited about it. It's also part of a
concept.
health initiative, literally for our community.
Oh, this is just brilliant. I hope people nationwide, find out about this. What a great project. I'd love to see towns everywhere doing this. And, in just the little bit of time we have left, I want to ask, we've talked about how the importance of the book on a large scale, and for the town and for the concept of preserving history of the schools. And just in a few seconds, and we're getting the sounds of the angels. But tell me, what is it for you personally that said, yes, I want to do this?
Two things said it for me. Even in my poetry, I spend a lot of it writing about my past because I evoke the feelings that I had when I was a little boy, and those are good feelings. And so telling my story is a way of preserving my experience for posterity. And I think in a more global sense, that's true of everybody who contributed to this book. This book is a part of history.
Okay, and on that note, I'm sorry, we're going to have to close, and we've run out of
went
time.
quickly.
I know,
Thank
it really
you.
did. You're welcome. And I do want to let my audience know, I want to thank you for watching. You can always see the show again on YouTube. I also want to thank my crew, and I love to close this show with the words of the fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. So find your story, find a way to tell it, and join us again next time. Thank you."
Food for the crew and guests is provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email Zita at zitatv.com or write to Zita Christian, Page 1 TV, P.O. Box 1515, Manchester, Connecticut 06045-1515. You can watch this and other episodes of Page 1 on youtube.com/Zita3x3.